You are here with us, Land Justice Futures. We are excited to host this foundational primer and webinar on an introduction to land justice. My name is Sarah, and I'm here with my teammates, Amy and Jesse, and we are with Land Justice Futures. So let's get started, and we'll start with just a little bit about us. If you've been with us for a while, you know that Land Justice Futures supports religious communities to explore options for their lands and properties that are creative, collaborative, and just. We work with movement partners and religious landowners to heal stories on sacred lands by creating land transitions that are rooted in racial and ecological justice. Land Justice Futures began as a very spirit-driven collaboration with both Catholic women religious and movement partners working in land justice, especially Black and Indigenous-led efforts to heal and restore land and relationships. We began with a handful of Catholic religious communities. While in possession of vast property holdings, these communities were growing smaller, discerning new forms of life and mission for these times. Meanwhile, our friends and partners leading in movements for climate and food justice, a regenerative and cooperative economy, reparations, and land back, they were often unable to secure the kinds of lands and properties where they could build the just and sustainable futures that our society needs and deserves. In those early days of working with religious landowners, we saw how property-based discernment can often become isolated from broader conversations about mission, justice, reckoning with history, and navigating change. Land Justice Futures bridges this justice, reckoning with history, and navigating. Land Justice Futures bridges this gap of reckoning with history and bringing in those conversations about mission and justice and how we navigate these times. So we support property discernment that's integrated with communities' core values of right relationship, ecological healing, and racial justice. And we are aligning property planning with, in words of Pope Francis, the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. To date, we've provided direct long-term accompaniment to 19 communities across the country, and our resources have been used by over 4,000 Catholic sisters and other land-owning Christian institutions. We do this work because at this hour, on the clock of the world, we all need healing. And that healing is crucial for creating just and livable futures for all. Oh, and I realize maybe I'm not spotlit yet. There we go. It's important to understand that we are just one small part of a much, much larger land justice movement, a movement that spans across time and place and peoples. And we are an extension of and accountable to that broader movement, one that is being led primarily by Black and Indigenous and other communities who have been most impacted by colonization, extraction, and racism. We are only able to do this work with you all in the first place because there are so many amazing groups who are leading the way of healing and protecting land and community. We are particularly grateful to our Movement Advisory Council, past and present. Our present council here is pictured. Leaders who give their counsel, relationship, oversight, and insight into our work to ensure that it's in the highest service of the broader movement. We also have there some other long-term partners. We have many long-term partners. That's just a handful of them, including ones that helped us set up our Movement Advisory Council. We are also part of a vast and growing movement of practitioners, land justice practitioners. So movement collectives, lawyers, radical real estate agents and innovative land trusts who are thinking really differently about land. So that's the broader universe that we are a part of, and it's incredible, and we're so grateful to be a part of it and to do our part. And for us, that part, that bread and butter, is working with religious communities who are making decisions about land. Our goals for our time together are to think differently about land and property. We will be deepening our understanding of how private property is interconnected with issues like climate change, racism, and colonization. We will be learning about the growing movement for land justice and hear some real stories of property transitions that have served or are serving the goals of land justice. And we will demystify a little bit about how land justice might be possible for your community, as well as ways that you can engage with us in that discernment or in that journey. Given Land Justice Future's particular focus, you'll notice that our context, the history we share, the examples we show, are geared towards our primary audience of religious communities. If that's not you, please know you are very welcome to learn and be with us. Welcome to our tiny slice of the land justice movement. There's still lots of good stuff here for you too. So with that, let's get started, and we'll start with a couple of core concepts. Number one, land is key to everything, and in our modern world, we think it's worth saying. Land is key to all life, human and more than human. And more specifically, if we go to the next slide, land is key to both racial and ecological healing. The decisions we make about land today play a critical role in creating a livable future for us all. Right now, the status quo we're operating in treats land as a commodity, one that can be poisoned, traded, developed for the purpose of profit, to the detriment of all. So to get to a different societal relationship with land, we need the ones who, quote, own it to make some bold moves that are different. Land justice has three core components. This is how we define land justice. First, land justice protects the land from extractive development and the harms of the speculative market. Second, land justice actively rehabilitates and regenerates the health of the land, of the waters, of the air, creating more vibrant and resilient ecosystems. Third, land justice restores access, equity, stewardship, and governance of land to the communities who have been dispossessed and exploited by colonialism and capitalism, especially Black and Indigenous peoples whose stolen labor, lives, and land created the foundation of our economy and our nation. And doing land justice may also include other people targeted by our current system of empire, people of the global South and global majority, migrants, women, poor and working class people who live close to the land. Pope Francis kind of says the same thing that we're saying, but in a different way in his letter, his encyclical Laudato Si. To use his language, land justice is about making decisions about land that don't treat the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor as separate things, but as one integral cry, which is asking for our integral response. And in doing land justice, it can occur in all kinds of places: financial institutions, property types, legal entities, and partnership scenarios. Just to give a little taste of what I mean, let me give you a little sneak peek into some real case studies that we've delved into at Land Justice Futures. And here are some photos that are connected to these examples. Land justice is the Presbyterian Church that donated their building to an Indigenous nonprofit and cultural center. Land Justice is a former Franciscan retreat center that co-determined a below market rate for a collective of BIPOC artists and activists who will continue to attend it as a place of respite and retreat. And the two groups work together to crowdfund the amount. Land Justice is a Methodist pastor who donated 80 acres of farmland to a Black-led land trust, protecting affordable land for regenerative farmers. And Land Justice is a community transitioning several urban homes into their local community land trust, which is a different model of a land trust and is a collectively owned land that drives down housing costs and gentrification permanently, given how the model works. So all of these examples help us understand that learning how to see property planning through the lens of land justice is the key here. If we learn to see through a land justice lens, it illuminates important truths and possibilities that equip us to live into our values in relevant and tangible ways. So this introduction course is really about introducing this lens. And through this lens, we can begin to ask different questions, like what else is possible when considering the options for the future of the land we love? How can we center racial and ecological healing in the decisions that we're making? And also, like, what if our decisions had the power to change an entire culture, the culture of where we live, the culture that we are participating in? So that is what we'll be practicing today, how to see the discernments we're facing through a land justice lens. So to start training that lens, we must first understand where we are right now and how we got here. And to do that, we must begin our introduction here with a short history of land injustice in our world. We do this not only to clarify the harms of the past, but to clarify the opportunities for healing and repair that are still ahead of us. With that, let's take a deep breath and be present with the roots of land justice. I'm going to pass the mic to my colleague, Jessie. Thank you, Jessie.
Thanks, Sarah. So as we get started here, let's take a look at this slide, and I wonder if anybody knows what this is a picture of. I'm seeing a few nodding heads there. This is one of the 3 papal bulls that make up the doctrine of discovery, which is a set of legal decrees by the Pope that compelled European nations to, quote, invade, capture, vanquish, and subdue all non-Christians. The church declared any land not inhabited by Christians to be empty or terra nullius, and therefore able to be discovered and claimed outright. The papal bulls that make up this doctrine served as the legal, moral, spiritual, and political justification for the transatlantic slave trade, for the genocide of Indigenous peoples, and by 1914 for the colonization of 84% of the land on Earth by European nations. As many of you, I'm sure, are aware, the Vatican recently repudiated the doctrine, although they did not formally repeal or rescind it, stating that its racist ideas are antithetical to Catholic teaching. However, a statement is a long way off from amending this wrong, and the doctrine of discovery still has power and teeth. For one thing, it's embedded in our founding myths and ideas about who we are as a country. And for another, it's an active legal doctrine and policy structure in the United States and around the world. In 1823, in a case called Johnson versus McIntosh, the Supreme Court enshrined these papal bulls into US law citing that, quote, discovery is the foundation of title, and this overlooks all proprietary rights in the natives. This is one of the first cases new lawyers learn, and it's considered one of the foundational cases in U.S. property law to this day, and has set the precedent for everything else that would follow. The papal bulls have been cited by the Supreme Court as recently as 2005, when the court refused the Oneida people their ancestral lands. The majority opinion writer was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, whose first citation is the doctrine of discovery, writing that ownership of indigenous lands became vested in the sovereign, first the discovering European nation, and later the original states and the United States. The story of colonization of land and people can be told through another image. This is a place you likely recognize and know by the name of Mount Rushmore. However, this place, located in the Black Hills, has an older name, Haysapa. It's one of the most sacred grounds, as well as a place of origin, for the Asheti Sakowin Lakota people. White colonists stole these sacred hills using violence, knowingly breaking a treaty in which they had agreed to never touch these hills, and then into the sacred stone chose to carve the faces of 4 of their white leaders, each of whom participated in the genocide of indigenous people. And this is an apt metaphor for how we got to where we are today, through land theft, destruction, and cultural domination. As a result of this history, today, 98% of rural land and 95% of urban land is owned by white people. Let me just repeat that. 98% of rural land and 95% of urban land is owned by white people. And under white control, land has not fared well. The doctrine of discovery helped to set up our current system of property law, in which it is not only legal, but perfectly normal to treat land as a commodity, and within which owners are given the right to destroy land they hold title to. In the words of Dene elder Pat McCabe, the doctrine wasn't just a moral or ethical imposition. It was the beginning of the destruction of this Mother Earth in its entirety. Since those papal bulls were written, just in the United States, we've lost 95% of old growth forest, 99% of prairie, and in the last 50 years alone, 1/3 of our topsoil. And we at Land Justice Futures understand that colonization of land and people, that is to say, land theft, enslavement, and the suppression of indigenous lifeways, and the dawn of an extractive economy that followed, are at the heart of our climate crisis. Every time we think about a real estate transaction, we're dealing with this legacy of stolen land and labor. Every private property sign, every deed holds this history. So even though the Vatican has publicly rejected the statements made in these bulls as antithetical to Catholic teaching, responsibility for them has not been taken, and the damage has been done. While apologies are necessary, alone they are insufficient. The harms of the doctrine won't be undone with one top-down order or one solution. The way we repair our relationship with land, with communities we've been segregated from, and with ourselves is through a deep commitment to healing and many, many, many experiments in land justice. So let's end this look at history with a story of how this history plays out in land today and what one woman is doing to move toward repair.
When you grow up in the
There we
city,
go.
you don't really have a reference point to see firsthand and experience firsthand how food makes it to your table. It has not been a normal aspect of our city life experience for probably 60, 70 years.
I was born into a military family. We lived on and around military bases, so I did not come from a landed family. My family had no land. It's assumed that if you're Black, you came from an urban area in the modern world, because there was a time if you were Black, it was assumed you came from a rural area. But that changed post-Civil War.
Particularly Black and brown people are faced with high concentration poverty, public health issues, all types of challenges and social inequities. And the work we do around developing green spaces, I consider this a liberation work.
We're losing 30,000 acres of land every year, we meaning African-American community. And we now own less land collectively than we did in the year 1935.
Like, how do we level the playing field for folks that grew up in poverty?
My father bought this land in 1968. All of my life, he grew a garden, and my mom put us to work in it and had us picking and shelling and all that sort of thing. Cattle farming, that was my dad's thing. When we heard the Agrarian Trust presentation, and they emphasized the injustices toward Black ownership of land, Dan and I thought, oh, we don't have children. There's nobody we have to leave the land to.
And lo and behold, maybe like 5, maybe 6 months later, Callie Walker decided to donate 80 acres to the Central Virginia Agrarian Commons and said, hey, I want to make sure that this land goes into Black and brown farmer hands.
The development of this piece of land to serve as an incubator for people of color who wish to come out and learn about agriculture. That's the real takeaway gift here. And we hope to develop it into a self-sustaining, vibrant community.
We want to work on a whole farm to consumer network with 2 to 5 or 7 farming businesses that are doing complementary things.
With the Central Virginia Agrarian Commons, we aspire to connect people to both rural land as well as urban land. By acquiring land in the urban space, we can use that land for folks to be trained and learn to get their chops and then move on to larger parcels of property.
It's not just something that we just do. We understand why we're doing it, and the significance to people who look like me is break the chains. And one of the last vestiges of that is being chained to food systems that you're not included in. That's why agriculture is the game changer.
I don't have a firm answer to the question of how does a person or a household figure out when they're taking too much of the earth's resources and somebody else is bound to suffer. But the sense that to whom much is given, much is required, that has taken a deep root in me. And I really want to live into dispersing the resources that I've been given and trading them off, I hope, for a form of extended family.
But like, this is the way that we charge up new generations to appreciate farmers, to become farmers. I see it happening in real time, just how community members are empowered by having access to land. We're not worried about a developer coming in with an offer and being like, yo, you gotta go. Like, no, we can take root.
That's what I'm hoping we'll be able to build here and show by example that a community can really be built up and operated by people of color that are successful in agricultural ventures and live sustainably, so that 5 generations from now, when I'm gone, that this place can still be standing and people can still be learning here. So we're going to work to see, can we make that happen?
You could think that donating land means you're just giving away everything that you have. But what I really feel like I'm doing is I'm trading it for near neighbors who are growing food, who care about the masses of humanity, who are taking on the social causes, and trading it for the world's best neighbors.
We're on the cusp of showing the world what can be done when organizations understand their positionality. The Agrarian Trust shows up as a collaborator to help create these liberation strategies for communities that have been marginalized. And that's the type of work that we need to be doing right now. Hype about it.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you to our friends and partners who are doing that work. We're pretty hype about them too. That was our friends and partners, Callie Walker, Duran Chavis, and Renard Turner. And we'll hear more about them in a little bit. But for now, we want to take a moment to process before we dig into more land justice solutions. We're going to break up our content of this webinar just with a few moments of conversation and integration. So I think my colleague is getting started on some breakouts, but some questions that we'd love for you to consider are: what struck you about the history of land injustice that you heard? Was there anything new that came through, or something that came through in a new way for you? And besides the obvious repair that is the donation of the farm itself, where else do you see repair happening in the story of Callie, Duran, and Renard? Now we're going to deepen more into the vision that we're working toward. As Frederick Jameson famously said, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. Thankfully, we don't have to imagine alone. All around us, there's a vibrant movement that is dreaming and practicing toward a new world, a mosaic of stewards and elders of Indigenous lifeways, Black-led community land trusts, regenerative farmers, bioregional hubs, climate activists, water protectors, mutual aid collectives, and grassroots organizers fighting for home. And this movement's creative spirit is calling forth the best of humanity, but it's strapped for infrastructure, it's strapped for land access, and it's fighting for sparse resources against a dominant culture and economy and political system that want it to fail. And this is where our work comes in, because we are organizing people to counter that power and build our own power with those movements, with those practitioners that are building a new world. So here you'll see some photos of our focus communities and some of our movement partners in the center from a gathering not too long ago. Meanwhile, religious groups across denominations, not just sisters, but beyond, are growing smaller and leading to the largest transition of religious land holdings in US history. So this is part of the answer to, well, what can we do if corporations are buying up land? Well, the people who own land can make different decisions. They can make different decisions about where land is going in these transitions. So in this story of religious groups and denominations, churches, communities getting smaller, our question is, what if this isn't a time of diminishment, but a sacred opportunity? What if we approached this moment as a chance to redirect the flow of power and join this movement towards a more just and communal future? So to help juice up our collective imagination and strengthen this land justice lens, we want you to be able to leave here with a deeper understanding of land justice, not just as some vague ideal or ambitious vision, but what it can look like in real life on the ground. So to that end, we're going to share just 2 examples of land justice transitions that get us closer to that future. Before I get started, I want to say we have dozens of examples of land justice to point to and to learn from. You can find many in our resources and video library. Land justice, as we've been saying, is really more of a lens and a way of relating, a way of reorienting our goals and understanding about property decisions, and reorienting that with a more creative approach and a more integral ecology. So what we want to say here is there's no one way to do land justice. These are just 2 examples and among many. So we just want to say land justice can happen in rural areas and urban areas. It can happen on 700 acres and it can happen on 1 acre. It happens in communities with abundant finances and ones with financial need. So if you find yourself wanting more thoughts, if you're like listening to these examples and you're like, wait, but what about this or this? Um, you know, stay in community with us, reach out, and you can listen to the opportunities at the end of the session about some of the invitations there. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's just hear 2 examples and stories about land justice. And I'm going to pass it to Jesse to talk more about Callie Walker.
Thanks. So this is Callie Walker. You just saw a video about this particular land transition, but we want to go into it a little bit more and give you some more backstory and details. I even saw some questions in the chat about it, so we're going to answer some of those questions here. Callie Walker is a Methodist minister in Virginia who inherited her father's 100-acre farm. And Callie and her husband, Dan, dreamed of having an intentional community on the land there. But as they were trying to develop that, they were running into some barriers, not quite finding people who were sticking. So at an organic farming conference in the area, Callie heard a presentation by Duran Chavez, a farmer and food activist in the nearby city of Richmond, who you also saw in the video. And from Duran, she learned about the history of Black land dispossession in the US South and the specific ways that Duran was already trying to reclaim the Black community's relationship with land and access to healthy foods. So Callie was deeply inspired by Duran's story and by this connection, and so she reached out to Duran about supporting his work. And soon she decided to donate 80 of her 100 acres to the Central Virginia Agrarian Commons, or CVAC. And CVAC is the landholding entity that was born from Duran's vision, and it holds a patchwork of urban and rural properties to support Black farming. And this model is an innovative twist on a land trust. It uses collective ownership to ensure that affordable tenure is protected for regenerative farmers forever. So Callie and Duran started as mere acquaintances, and Callie was clear that while she would love to support, she would let Duran discern what that might look like and whether she would play a role at all. And as they continued to build trust and work together, Callie was invited to be a key ally and advocate for the Central Virginia Agrarian Commons. And now she sits on their board. And as we heard her say in the film, she said, "I'm not giving my land away. I'm trading my land for the best neighbors in the world." And we would argue trading it for a kind of land justice future where she lives now. Sarah, I'll turn it back over to you for another example.
Sure. All right, so let's see. If we go to the next slide, I'm going to talk about a Quaker school. This is the John Woolman School, and it was founded in the 1960s by Bay Area Quakers in California. And it was founded as a place where young people could live and learn in alignment with Quaker values. For decades, this place, which is tucked in the Sierra Nevada foothills of California, it served both as a high school and as a gathering place for camps, meetings, and community events. But financial strain was constant. The school scaled back its programming in the year 2000, and it closed in 2016. After a devastating wildfire, the COVID-19 pandemic, and growing maintenance costs, the board concluded in 2022 that continuing operations was no longer viable and decided that it needed to sell the land. Meanwhile, in the years leading up to that point, Woolman's staff and board had begun building relationships with the Nevada City Rancheria Nisenan tribe. So if you go to the next slide, you can see them. Whose ancestral homelands include the Woolman site. They had invited the tribal spokeswoman, Shelley Covert, as a guest speaker at a quarterly meeting, and several tribal members had walked the land with the staff And it was during that meeting on the land that they identified the area as a historic Nisenan town, as an ancient village site named Ulicha. And so they'd learned this, so and started building this relationship. So when it came time to sell, the Woolman community reached out to the tribe first. Those earlier interactions had really planted a seed. And so when the time came to find a buyer for the property, the Quakers asked them, the Nisenan, to see if they would be interested in acquiring the land. So soon sale negotiations began, and the complex transaction took more than a year. This was a land transition that required more than conventional real estate sales. It demanded cultural sensitivity, trust building, a shared commitment to repair, as well as outside support from some of our friends and partners at the Center for Ethical Land Transition. As Shelley Covert, the spokesperson, reflected, there is a deep desire to return land to Indigenous communities. But many times, one's desire to return land to tribes and their real-time dependence on equity or dollar value of that land becomes problematic. She emphasized that together, the two groups were able to engage modern economic constraints and possibilities and craft a new path forward together. The Quakers identified a sale price of $1.2 million, a price high enough to satisfy all the financial obligations with a small cushion for any unexpected expenses of the sale. The Nisenan nonprofit, CHIRP, raised over $2.5 million, largely through crowdfunding, to purchase the land and begin restoration work. So the picture on the right there, that's the CHIRP group on the land, and the one on the left is a different body of land on their tribal or their ancestral homelands. So they crowdfunded this 2.5 million, and the Quakers mobilized their networks heavily around the campaign, encouraging friends in the area as well as across the country to support the project. So they were really in solidarity with the Nisenan tribe in trying to make this work and trying to mobilize the resources for this sale to happen. So after a year-long process involving lawyers, real estate agents, Quaker committees, and the Center for Ethical Land Transition, escrow closed, and the tribe announced their return to Ulicha. There's a really beautiful video that's too long. It's about 10 minutes for us to play here, but there's a really beautiful video about the homeland recovery of Ulicha that we can put in the chat right now that you can watch later that I highly recommend. Okay, so with that, we can go to the next slide. Just want to take a moment. How are you experiencing these stories? What are some attributes that you're seeing in one or both of these stories? We kind of want to identify some core principles here that are active in these case studies. So we're going to give you just a minute to think about it and reflect on what are you hearing and seeing as patterns in these stories that might be some core principles of a land justice transition. And if you want to add it to the chat, we'll just play some music for about a minute and then move on to the next thing. Okay, so to recap, land justice is creative, collaborative, and healing. Land justice is about ecological and racial justice, both, totally interwoven. Land justice has three parts: protection of the land against extraction and the speculative market, regeneration of the health of the land, and equity to communities who have been dispossessed and exploited. And then lastly, as I have been hammering home probably a little bit too much, many kinds of land and many kinds of places and many kinds of legal and financial situations. Oh, does that rhyme? Kind of. land justice is possible with all of them. So I'm going to now pass the mic back to Jesse to talk about the ways that you can get involved with our land justice work and what we can offer you in your community. Jesse, take it away.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so one of the main ways that you can get involved in our work for land justice is for your community to become a focus community. And here again, we're speaking to women religious. If you're part of a presbytery or group of churches, this could apply to you too. So through our focus community program, we currently work with 19 religious communities across the country. And applications are now open right now to join our 4th cohort of communities. This program is a community of practice for religious communities who are ready to create bold, just, and creative plans for the lands they love. The program is designed for communities who are ready to incorporate that land justice lens that we talk about, who are ready to put that land justice lens into a specific property discernment. We offer 2 years of accompaniment, formation, and on-the-ground support. So you can learn more information about this program at the link being shared in the chat, and there's also a link there to apply. You can also join our next info session for our Focus Community Program on September 11th, if you're curious. And you can follow a link in the chat to register for that info session. Additionally, we're also finding ways to expand our offerings beyond that 2-year program. So stay tuned for more ways to engage with us in land justice. And you can do that by first and foremost joining our mailing list to hear about upcoming offerings, by visiting our resource library to dig deeper. And we do have a short survey at the end that's going to ask you specifically what you're interested in. Fill that out and we'll get in touch with you sooner rather than later. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Sarah, to close us out.
Great, thank you. Well, thanks for being with us today. We know that these are hard times. And to close, we want to end with some words that are feeling important and orienting, both for this work as a whole and during what I'll describe as one of the darkest and hardest times that I've lived through, but that I know many others are feeling that in this country, but also around the world. I saw a note in the chat about recognizing the connections between the doctrine of discovery and the genocidal violence happening in Palestine, and you know, continuing there through the things that are happening in Congo and Sudan and the things that are happening in this country right now. So I think it's really important for us to connect this moment with the land justice work that is calling us as a team and as a community right now. In 2015, Pope Francis said of our world and our times, we are not living an era of change, but a change of era. And with change, this change, it carries certainly hope. We heard that in the chat. Creativity and kind of magnetic, wonderful expressions of the human spirit overcoming the darker aspects of these changes. But yeah, as we also see in our world today, this new era that we're in, or this era between eras, is also painful and frightening and confusing. And philosopher and political theorist Antonio Gramsci called these periods of transition interregnum, and said that they were characterized by upheaval and uncertainty, and that when old systems are collapsing, but a new stable order has yet to emerge, he famously said, "The old world is dying, and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters," which I must admit feels so true right now. And so if that's where you're at, we just want to connect with you in that way. and connect that with this call to land justice. So, in this time of the old world dying and the new world struggling to be born, we also draw on the ideas of Meg Wheatley. So, in this time of change and uncertainty, we have to pay attention to what we're feeding. What are the futures that we are investing our energy into, our resources into, investing land into? Here we have this image, this two loops image rendered by our lovely artist in residence, Amy, of Meg Wheatley's two loops theory. And it also illustrates this idea that I think Gramsci, also points to, of this period of transition when an old world is collapsing and another is being midwifed, is struggling to be born. And after hundreds of years, and in some cases millennia, of empire, of ecological destruction and supremacist ideology, patriarchy, much of it brought by Western colonization, today we are witnessing a growing movement to address these harms and to engage with the world from a completely different paradigm. So we are seeing a movement of people that are doing the decomposition work of that old world order and the midwifing work of that new possibility. So we're right here in this middle, in this messy middle. And I think this image asks us, what is the past present that we are hospicing, and what is the present future we are midwifing? What I think we're pointing to here is something that Meg Wheatley also talks about as midwifing islands of sanity. She describes this task within this current societal moment, this moment of transition. In the midst of increasing fear and turbulence, islands in sanity are where people remember what it means to be human, where they can show up to create possibility together. In these islands, people are not pretending the world isn't falling apart. Instead, they're choosing to lead as warriors of the human spirit, creating the conditions for integrity, generosity, and sanity to flourish. We believe that by making decisions centered on land justice, religious landowners can help resource islands of sanity, the futures we need and the movement infrastructure we need to get there. So we hope that you and your communities will join us in this broader movement. And we're so grateful you're here.